In northern Gaza, where Israeli forces have targeted residential areas as they step up their month-long siege. Wounded Palestinians were taken to hospital after early morning strikes in Jabalia and Beit Lahiya. Dozens of people have been killed in recent days. The destruction so overwhelming, entire areas have been essentially cut off, blocking access to major roads. Rescue teams say they cannot reach the injured, some of whom are trapped under the rubble. A polio vaccination center was also targeted, injuring at least 4 people. In the past 48 hours, more than 50 children have been killed in the north in what the UN calls Israel's indiscriminate strikes. Hind Khoudary is live for us in Deir el-Balah in central Gaza. And Hind, do we have any idea how many people, as we speak right now, are trapped under rubble, perhaps fighting for their lives, as rescue teams say we can't reach them?
Hundreds, Sami, hundreds of Palestinians are trapped under the rubble, especially after the Israeli forces targeted 2 densely populated houses in the northern Gaza Strip today. According to health officials, they said that 13 Palestinians were killed in the northern parts of Gaza since the early hours of the morning. But what we need to know, Sami, is for 12 days now, there has been no ambulances, no civil defense teams, no paramedics in the northern Gaza Strip, and there has been endless appeals and calls from families saying that they have alive people under the rubble, that their family members are trapped under the rubble, and no one could rescue them for a couple of reasons. First is because there's no civil defense teams and ambulances, but also people were digging with their bare hands. And according to these families, they said that they do not have any equipment to help those trapped under the rubble. The situation in the north is terrifying for the fact that we're about a month of a siege without water, without food, without medicine, without aid. Yes, the Israeli forces made some polio vaccination clinics in the Gaza city, but they deprived thousands of other children from this polio vaccine, and also they're also depriving those children from food and water. Parents are saying that they are unable to feed their children, so they're either going to die from forced starvation or from suffocating under the rubble or from the Israeli airstrikes, Sami.
All right, that's Hind Khoudary for us live from Gaza. Gaza's health ministry is warning Israeli forces are tightening their siege on hospitals in the north. Kamal Adwan Hospital is dealing with huge numbers of patients who've been injured. The facility is under-resourced and understaffed. Right now, the entire hospital is being run by a single doctor and his assistant. We spoke to Dr. Hussam Abu Safiha about the challenges he faces.
In this war, we've had to learn to do everything. As Israeli forces stormed the hospital and detained the entire medical staff, I, together with my assistant physician, were left alone between a rock and a hard place, either to give up or start doing what we can to save lives. By any measure, we've had to perform miracles here. We've been flooded with victims suffering all kinds of injuries, far beyond a full-fledged hospital capacity, be it in terms of bed capacity to staff qualifications, skills and capabilities, let alone physical and mental limits. But we were forced to act. I administered anesthesia to a child who was in critical condition, and my colleague opened up his abdomen and stopped the bleeding. It was the first time I ever performed a surgery. This was totally outside the scope of our specialization. We did what we had to save lives, otherwise innocent victims would die. By the grace of God, the child survived and was moved to the ICU. I have a message to the world, not only to the WHO, the Red Cross and the international community, but also to the proponents of international law and all those who pontificate on humanity and human rights. An urgent humanitarian passage must be opened without delay. to have fuel and medical supplies delivered, and also to allow for specialized medical staff to come and lend a helping hand. We have been abandoned by the whole world and left to work under unimaginably harsh and horrifying conditions.
Now, Israeli forces have reportedly employed civilian companies to flatten homes in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. A video uploaded by an employee shows them bulldozing through ruins with plans to destroy a local mosque.
הנה כל ההריסות של רפיח. משק עפר עובדים עם הבאגרים בתוך רפיח. אנחנו פה כבר 3 ימים ויש לנו שנה קדימה להמשיך ולא לעצור. ראש משק עפר אלון אלגלי איתנו בכבודו ובעצמו הגיע. נעלה. מחר הוא מגיע להוריד להם את המסגד.
Daniel Levy is the president of the US Middle East Project. He's also a former advisor in the Israeli Prime Minister's office. Joins us now live from London. Good to have you with us. So, Daniel, what are we to make of video like that private companies being employed to flatten what's left of neighborhoods, including a mosque? Why?
Sammy, all I can say is it is a consequence of the staggering level of impunity which has become normalized and must never be normalized over this past year, because that has dramatic consequences, of course, for Palestinians, for Lebanese, for others. But I think it has dramatic consequences for the world all of us live in. And anyone who thinks, well, yeah, that looks like it's a long way away, I don't want to bother my Sunday with this. It matters to everybody what is happening here because of this impunity. The evidence is there, Sammy. You have courageous journalists whose lives are at risk, 176 dead. The Western mainstream media has been derelict in its duty. But the evidence is there in significant measure because of clips like the one you showed us of Israelis not only publicly stating, but giving us the video evidence of what is being done. That means that what is happening to Palestinians primarily, but not only in Gaza, there's the West Bank, there's Lebanon, will have an impact for generations. The level of destruction, suffering, even polio vaccination campaigns that cannot be continued. But it's also about how international law is being laid to rest in an even more definitive way.
Hang on, Daniel. We'll come to the international aspect in a second. But coming back to this video, it doesn't come in a vacuum, because it comes, in the last week, 10 days, of hearing increasing statements from Israeli ministers calling, basically, or talking about the destruction and settlement of Gaza. I want to read to you a couple of quotes. So this one is by May Golan, the Minister for Social Equality, saying, "What, in the end, will we do that will really hurt them? Only taking territory will really hurt them." Another quote, this one is by the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, also saying, "If we want to, we can renew settlement in Gaza." Now, both of those comments made, October 21st, when they were addressing this gathering, this conference to discuss resettling Gaza. Is there a link between statements like that from government ministers and the sorts of videos that we're seeing?
It goes much further back, Sammy, of course, because what Israel has done is that it has maintained an occupation and apartheid regime which has been largely paid for across decades by international funding for something that has become a Bantustan, the Palestinian Authority, and private subcontractors are in on this. And as usual in war, are profiteering, but here it is so transparent. And you have the Americans and some states in your region who are saying, we will pay. We've seen these reports. We will bring in private contracting firms. There's an Israeli company, CDG, which is being talked about, that are going to be part of this destruction, this displacement. They already are. And then you have government ministers. It was Netanyahu's Likud party, which was the main organizer of that conference for resettlement in Gaza. And it is only possible because Israel's trade ties internationally continue to be normal. The export and sale and gifting of weapons to continue this to Israel is still treated as a normal thing. When Israel violates International Court of Justice, urgent provisional measures in a genocide case, when it violates those, the normalcy continues, the bilateral relations continues. Israel's membership in good standing of the United Nations, even when it's attacking UN shelters, attacking UN troops, driving roughshod through the UN Charter. Even when its ambassador says the UN building should be destroyed and shreds the UN Charter on the podium at the General Assembly. All these things happen. The private subcontractors go in and they say, hey, we're also part of it. Where are the arrest warrants? Where are the sanctions? Where is that questioning of whether Israel can continue to be a member of good standing in the United Nations? Because what it all adds up to, Sam, is the destruction that we see and also the impossibility of doing diplomacy because Israel comes to those talks and says, yes, we'll agree to a ceasefire in Lebanon, but we can continue to operate militarily in another sovereign country. Or yes, we'll agree to a few days pause in Gaza, but we insist that we'll continue the destruction. And the Americans take this out to the world and they say, Israel's ready for a ceasefire. Enough of this.
Precisely related to that point, when you say, where are these leaders? Well, while we're seeing all those things you mentioned, we're kind of hearing even an opposite message at times from Western leaders, from one that you might expect, with the British Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, for example, talking in the Parliament about why one should not talk about genocide in Gaza. This, of course, despite the fact that we had on November 16th that report or statement by 34 UN special rapporteurs and experts talking about a genocide in the making. Well, this is David Lammy's take on it.
Those terms were largely used when millions of people lost their lives in crises like Rwanda, the Second World War and the Holocaust. And the way that they are used now undermines the seriousness of that term.
It won't be lost on, I think, many people, of course, Daniel, that take the example of the genocide in Rwanda, which David Lammy referred to. Well, millions of people did not perish in that. Why are we seeing, so a bit of a factual conundrum for him on that front, but why are we seeing the push to try and downplay what's happening in Gaza from Western leaders, even to the point where they sometimes talk themselves into factual contradictions?
I'm sure there are many reasons, Sammy, but if you begin to acknowledge what is happening there, then the chasm between your policy and the reality becomes too much to sustain. So the only way you can sustain a policy of complicity is by denying what you are complicit in. But the conundrum that you described goes far deeper, because not only, and David is a lawyer, he knows this material, I'm sure. Genocide has a legal definition. That is why the case is moving forward at the ICJ. That's why those urgent provisional measures. It is not the magnitude, the numbers of dead. And according to the logic spoken there, the UK would have to withdraw its submission in the Myanmar genocide case, not brought by the West, of course, brought by Gambia. Gambia brought a case to the ICJ on the genocide against the Rohingya. The court will rule on that quite soon. Other countries submitted in favor of the Gambia deposition that this is a genocide. The UK was one of them. The UK should be consistent, and other Western countries, including Germany, which has, alongside the US, been perhaps one of the most complicit, most embracing and encouraging
you, Daniel,
of
but
these
to
horrors.
your point, David Lammy himself on that issue tweeted quote, horrific, the Rohingya are facing a genocide. So apparently he does know what a genocide is according to legal terminology, at least when it comes to the necessity, quote unquote, of having millions of people to be killed before it's considered a genocide, right? Just by his own virtue of his own tweets.
And it all comes down, Sammy, to are we creating, and it's exceptionalism, because some claim, oh, Israel's being held to a higher standard. No. Israel used to be held to a lower standard. Now it's held to no standard at all. And apparently Palestinian, Lebanese, and other lives have no value at all. But that is not a world anyone should want to live in, because coming to a conflict near you soon. That's the message here. And it's led by the US, let's be clear. But its Western allies have gone along with this. But others also, let's be clear, other states can also bring sanctions. They can also have impact on their Western allies. Large sovereign wealth funds, other investors can say, no, we're not going to go along with this. So everyone here has a responsibility, and it's a responsibility spelled out in an ICJ advisory opinion in July, now codified in a UN General Assembly Resolution 12626. And unless and until we see the staggering impunity challenged and reversed, we are going to see what I'm sure many, if not all of us, can no longer look at our TV screens and consider that this is a world that's acceptable to live in when this is being done to people in broad daylight with impunity.
All right, Daniel, I did want to ask you about the level of accountability for a lot of Arab leaders as well in terms of what they can or are not doing. But I think we're going to have to leave that. I'm being told we're out of time.
I might have just touched on it there,
You
Sammy.
did. So thank you for at least ticking that box. We'll bring you back to talk about that aspect later. Thanks so much, Daniel Levy there.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.